before I hand this off, this I think is just one of those questions that come up again and again from our friends on the industry side who talk about, what can we do? What sort of opportunities are there for us to work with the cannabis industry? I'm not going to produce a cannabis product. I don't want to do a cannabis-infused wine, but I feel like there's some there could be some opportunities for us to explore. So what are they? And so that's why we decided we want to talk about this. So we've got a really diverse panel. So I want to introduce Alicia Rose. Alicia's going to moderate this session. Alicia, why don't you go ahead and take it from here? And then again, we'll see everyone at lunch after this session's over.
All right, thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. So I'm Alicia Rose. I'm the founder of a vertically integrated cannabis company called Herba Buena. We've been around since 2015. My background is consulting for incredible, iconic, and legendary wineries throughout Napa and Sonoma and internationally. So I have a foot firmly planted, you might say, both in the cannabis industry now as well as in the wine industry. And of course, we get asked these questions all the time. My colleagues in the wine industry, is this something to be afraid of? How do we leverage it? What are the ways that we can work with these cannabis companies? Everybody's asking about cannabis. So we've got an incredible panel here today. I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and we will be taking questions at the end, and you can send them in through the app as well. So thanks for being here. All right, so real quick, I'll just let everybody introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started.
Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Jamie Evans, and I'm the founder of The Herb Som. The Herb Som is a cannabis blog and lifestyle brand that focuses on the gourmet side of the industry. So I currently serve as an educator, event host, and producer and writer, specializing in cannabis, CBD, food, wine, and everything having to do with the canna-culinary world. I'm probably best known for my curated cannabis dining events throughout the Bay Area and Los Angeles, but I've also been contributing to several publications for the past couple of years, including Pop Sugar, Mary Magazine, and most recently, the Clever Root Magazine. In addition, I'm the co-editor of Gold Leaf's Cannabis Cooking Journal and the author of a brand new CBD lifestyle book that will be coming out next spring 2020 by Quarto Publishing Group. And alongside my work in the cannabis industry, I'm also a certified specialist of wine with over 11 years of wine industry experience. And in early 2017, I decided to launch my company, The Herb Som, in the cannabis space. So given my wine background and my love for the gourmet world, it really felt like the culinary side to cannabis was a perfect fit. So I dove right in. And since then, a critical part of my business has been educating others with a focus on highlighting terpenes, which are the organic compounds that give cannabis all the wonderful flavors and aromas you perceive when you're smelling through your favorite strains. But they also have a lot of therapeutic benefits. So having an opportunity to shape the culinary side to cannabis is what excites me most. So I'm so excited to be here today. So thank you, Wine and Weed, for having me on the panel.
Omar, one of my favorite people, legendary cannabis lawyer.
Wow. I'm surprised. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you. My name is Omar Figueroa. I have been a lawyer in the cannabis space for 20 years. I started out as a freedom defense lawyer, and I have defended hundreds of cannabis growers across California in my career. And recently, I defended my last cannabis case because there's no longer freedom defense. I've shifted my practice to do regulatory compliance, licensing and permitting, and intellectual property. When I was in law school at Stanford Law School, I thought widgets were really boring, and I didn't really focus on corporate law. But had I known that we'd be talking about weed instead of widgets, I would have attended every single corporate class available. But I've had a very interesting journey, watching the evolution of the cannabis industry. I've also documented the cannabis laws and regulations. Woo-hoo! And have written the third in the series of books.
Thank God someone did.
Yeah. And this is the latest book, which is available at the local bookstore Copperfields, and you can also get it on Amazon Prime and on Barnes & Noble. But basically, I've kind of I'm a nerd, as you can tell, somebody who writes a book for very little financial remuneration. But I guess my passion, with cannabis is more with cannabis law as well as with cannabis itself. I've been a judge at the Emerald Cup before, And I have a deep and abiding appreciation for cannabis and those who work with cannabis, and especially those who grow the world's finest cannabis. And I count myself lucky to have many of those growers as my clients. I also count myself lucky to have a law practice, where I get to work with really intelligent people such as Lauren Mendelson, who's my associate, present here. And I also, I'm a director of the International Cannabis Bar Association, and I teach numerous continuing legal education seminars to lawyers on cannabis law. And so it's a pleasure to be here to share my affinity for cannabis law with you and nerd out.
Thanks, Omar. We'll nerd out with you any day. All right, Jared from the Sonoma Experience.
Hi, my name's Jared Giamona. I'm the founder of the Sonoma County Experience. We're a tour company that offers cannabis, wine, and craft beer tours throughout Sonoma County, and giving guests a new way to visit wine country, because right now it's not just wine country anymore. We've been operating since January of 2018, and been rocking and rolling ever since.
I know people are going to have a lot of questions for you. All right, good. And Devin from Hook and Ladder Winery.
Hey, everybody. Devin, Hook and Ladder Winery. Yeah, I've been in the wine industry for over a decade, and actually one of the probably kind of dinosaurs to be in one space the whole time. I've been with Hook and Ladder for over a decade. I started back in 2007 on the production side of things. Always loved to gab, so I moved into sales pretty quickly. I think I was distracting them on the production side of things, so maybe I can make some money for them. And I've been doing it ever since. I really found a affinity for hospitality, and then really over the last 5 years, the business side and direct-to-consumer is my focus. And I'm here today to talk about some of those shifts and how to help kind of, I think, brand yourself in a new way with cannabis. I think it's really, really important for wineries to understand the landscape and the changing demographics, how they're engaging in wine, and really how they're staying loyal to a brand or becoming excited about a brand.
Thanks. Basically, when you get high, wine tastes better? I don't know. Is that a thing? I think so, for sure. So we've, through Yerba Buena, been hosting something I've been calling lovingly the elevated tasting experience. And we'll talk a little bit about this when we get to the compliance piece. But the idea that combining cannabis and wine is absolutely not allowed by the ABC and may threaten wineries' ABC liquor licenses or restaurants or anyone else who holds those licenses. And yet, these two incredible products go so well together from an experiential, sensual, farming, highly prized and highly regulated agricultural product sort of basis. And so as we've been looking at expanding this and getting lots of questions from wineries like you and many, many others throughout our beautiful Northern California wine country, the question always comes up, how do we put these two things together? If we can't have these two products on the same premise at the same time or on a licensed premise, how then can we come up with creative ways to start developing these relationships so that we can expand the cannabis companies' footprint and sphere of influence, and vice versa, the various wineries, same, with existing and new demographics. So I think, Devin, I'm going to start with you because you're the wine guy here that's bravely stepped into this sort of unknown abyss. And just give us a little bit of idea, like, how have you and your winery worked with the cannabis industry to increase your brand equity at your winery?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to start and say, first of all, it is limiting with regulation, and I know Omar's going to go into detail about that. And so really, we started working with Sonoma County Experience and Jared back in February 2018. He had approached me after a visit to the tasting room and, asked whether we'd be interested in this experience that kind of, focused on some of the things that we have such a rooted history in, and wine, weed, craft beer. And I was very, very excited to get that opportunity. So we've seen nearly 200 individuals that he's brought into us, multiple corporate groups, most Recently, we had Ease. Let's see, we've had...
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
What are the people interested in when they come to your winery, and how are you incorporating this conversation for them?
Yeah.
Are you doing anything differently?
I think that in some ways there's been an openness about cannabis over the last couple of years that you've seen organically, even when it's not somebody that's with the tour. You know, I would say no. We're really staying still focused in what our story is, and to you know, kind of guide them through an educational process through wine, and how to incorporate in their lifestyle. But I mean, the DTC shift that I've largely had has been very little about product. We have a great product, but how to differentiate yourself in an area that is got a lot of great products in history has largely been through experience and lifestyle, as well as cause. And I think if you have a causes or a good story and you're tied into those things, and then how to fit those lifestyles, we can give you the history of the wine on the back end and sell it there. But I think one of the great things about working with cannabis right now is that we're attracting people. And so we get that initial face time that we may not get with the demographic that say Jared's brought in the last year and a half.
So it's really opening up a new market and new faces that are finding your winery because you're open to the idea of cannabis, not that you're actually even incorporating it in any sort of specific way right now. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So Jared, I guess that's a great question for you. You are doing these tours, incorporating all of our favorite things. You could add some chocolate in there, and then you've got me 100%. But if you can get really specific about ways that you're actually developing these experiences and explaining them to your consumers, what types of experiences are these customers that are coming to you looking for a new way to sort of see wine country? Can you give us a few examples of things that are working in wineries that you're working with? And cannabis companies.
Yeah. So we work with, we offer a few different experiences right now between wine and cannabis, and as well as craft beer and cannabis, which all three are headquartered right here. This is pretty much the epicenter of all three. Our wine and cannabis, what we do is we have 2 different cannabis stops and 2 different wine stops throughout the day. And what we do is we emphasize and educate on the agricultural similarities. So similar to the way wine grapes grow, there's a lot of similarities to the way outdoor cannabis grows. And so guests still get their wine country experience, their atypical experience, but then they're also open to a whole new world in the legal cannabis side. So
if I call you and I say, hey, I heard you're doing weed tours, can you tell me what a day would look like?
Yeah. So we start out, so if it's during the week, we start out at a place called CannaCraft. So you're gonna go and see how cannabis is extracted into oil, edibles are made, walk a working, living, breathing manufacturing facility, and then we go to a place called Soulful Dispensary in Sebastopol, and they meet with a representative there where they get to ask questions about different products, different delivery methods. They actually have a really nice handbook that they hand out to people, and it breaks down terpenes, CBD, THC, so our guests get really familiar with the product before they step inside the retail space. And from there, we head over to Hook and Ladder and start our wine tastings. We have lunch, stop at Cross State on the way back, and we typically leave from the city, and we head back to San Francisco.
Awesome. So the wineries that I talk to about, hey, let's do a cannabis event, and then we'll send them to your place, I get a lot of, I don't want people showing up high. What's been your experience with that, Devin?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've always looked at every interaction as potential, and that you have to be on your game and looking at what's in front of you. I think there are, you know, at least concerns that when somebody's high in front of you, that maybe that's not the same buyer mentality. That you have some awkwardness that needs to be cut through, things like that. I think that can happen with really anybody that comes into a tasting room, and especially because wine has oftentimes kind of marketed the product with you have to engage with a high level of familiarity. And so when people walk in the door, there's all sorts of degrees of confidence. And so, you know, I haven't seen that. In fact, I mean, our conversion rates with Jared's groups are higher than our average.
Did everybody just hear that? That's amazing. We need to be doing more of those.
Yeah, and some of that is also, of course, how we're going to experience with Jared. He does do a sit-down lunch usually, and we're able to spend a little more face time. Our format is largely walk-in, so depending on how we're formatting our tasting, of course, those conversion rates can change. And we're signing up, nearly 15% of the people that have walked through the door with Jared into our club. It's very, very early on, so the attrition rates really haven't gotten there. And how we market, I think one of the things that is very interesting is that we have knowledge on their lifestyle, right? And this is really where the marketing piece and looking at an individual instead of just a swath of statistical data, looking at individuals and having information about how they got to us and what they enjoy. And we're going to be able to market, I think, more successfully through cannabis interest in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. Jared, what are guests asking you for when they're sort of booking these tours, and what are you not able to provide right now?
Yeah, that's a good one. The main piece of feedback we get is guests want to be able to consume the cannabis products that they purchase, which it's difficult right now, but we take them through the process, right? They get to go see how it's made, how it's done, the final product on the shelf, and they get all this information. Now they want to try the product and see if they actually like it. And we don't have that ability, which it takes away from the experience. You don't know if you necessarily like the product. So that's our main piece of feedback we get.
Okay, good. Jamie, this is an incredibly beautiful symbiotic relationship where we've got an amazing tour driver that's proactive and thinking of all these new ways to help folks engage with all of our brands, cannabis and wineries alike. But there are certainly limitations, and if we don't have a Jared and we're just a winery or a cannabis company, what do you think is the most powerful way that these folks can start to work together and develop their own organic programs?
Yeah, so my background is primarily focused on creating experiences. So if you're a winery looking to get involved with a cannabis event, yes, there are several limitations, but I think it is a good way to enhance your brand equity. But before you commit to something, there is some criteria that should be met. So for example, some questions that you should ask yourself before signing up for an event, if you're in a winery, include: how will this event improve my brand awareness? How will this event build brand loyalty? How will my wines be perceived at this event? Who are the consumers? Is this my target market? And what are the benefits of being involved? So if you can easily answer these questions, or if the event organizer that you're working with can provide answers in a meaningful way that makes sense for your brand, then that event could be a good fit. But the key thing here is to really find events that make your brand shine. So there's tons of cannabis events that are going on right now. So you really want to find event partners that add to your brand messaging and not take away from it.
Can I just make a note on that? And
yeah.
This is probably for Omar, but we can't serve cannabis and alcohol on the same premise. Is that correct?
That's correct. At the same premises.
So when you're talking about wineries engaging with cannabis companies, how do we do that?
So considering all the legal hurdles, which I know we're going to talk a lot about today, in my opinion, one of the best approaches right now for cross-activations between wine and weed companies are private pairing dinners, where consumers are able to evaluate wine and weed together. And remember, the key thing here is the word private. So this is not public events, and you're not holding these at ABC alcohol license facilities, because as we'll discuss, there's many challenges with that. And from an educational standpoint, so with these private experiences, which I specialize in, there's also so many touch points between wine and cannabis that really resonate with consumers at events. So for example, at HerbSom Activations, I love to collaborate with winery partners and cannabis companies to create programming that incorporates similar talking points. So we're talking about growing practices, we're talking about terroir, aromas and flavors, and of course, pairings. So all these topics have been highly publicized, highly talked about in the wine industry for years, but these are also things that people are talking about in the cannabis industry. So combining these things together not only benefits brands, but it also benefits the consumer. And if you're a brand and you provide very valuable education to your consumers, then you're really building your brand equity that way as well.
Education is key.
Yep.
I hear a lot about, and this is to sort of everybody on the panel, but mostly right now what we're seeing, and actually I'm a board member of the Napa Valley Cannabis Association, which, believe me, 4 years ago I never could have imagined that that was going to be a thing. So progress. But we're hosting an event in a couple of, I think next month. And, of course we're in Napa Valley, and the question is, are we going to have cannabis there, or are we going to have wine there? And so what happens is wine almost always wins out at events still. Although I've seen other people braving it from the perspective of, forget the wine, we're going to have the cannabis. So at this point, it sounds like most of the events are really focused on the wine, and the cannabis gets to be there just from an educational standpoint. Is that what you're seeing so far?
Yeah, that's correct. And especially considering all the limitations and the legal hurdles that we have to work with right now, which kind of leads to our next question, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So Omar, everybody's going to have questions for you. This is a maze of regulations that we've all been struggling to figure out. What is legal? What is not? What can we do? In fact, I'll just tell you, we do have a couple of questions that have come in over the app, which is, how do we deal with delivery to various areas and for these events? How can wineries participate in cannabis events in ways that don't put their licenses at risk? There's a number of very similar questions. So can you just give us a quick overview of sort of what legally we're allowed to do when we bring these two products together?
Yes, you basically cannot sell or consume cannabis and alcohol on the same premises. And that's according to ABC Industry Advisory on Cannabis and Alcoholic Beverages that was issued in May of this year, which is really a bummer because it really puts a kibosh on like many dreams and hopes. But this is not like an unchanging law. This is totally changeable. This is susceptible to legislative modification. And, I think it's going to change when people stand up and do something about it. But for now...
That's all of you, by the way.
Yes. But for now, we can't really have wine and weed at the same event, and especially on ABC licensed premises. You can have wine and weed at private events as long as it's adults 21 and over, because cannabis is now legal for adults 21 and over in private, and they can consume it any way they want. So you can host a private dinner party that involves serve wine and offer cannabis, and that's completely legal under California law.
Even if you're a licensed cannabis company?
If you're a licensed cannabis company, yes, but you can't do it at an ABC licensed premises, and you also cannot do it on the premises of a cannabis retailer, because you can't sell cannabis at an alcohol retailer. There's a new law that prohibits that, so there's no more infusing cannabis or cannabinoids or CBD into alcoholic beverages, because there's a new law that prohibits that. And then you also cannot really sell alcohol at a dispensary, you know. And so I think this was initially done to prevent what's known as the technical term, I guess, is cross-fading, when people get like super intoxicated from mixing cannabis and wine. But I've spoken at many like festival conferences where like festival organizers say, we've been hosting concerts for decades, and people use cannabis and alcohol responsibly at all these concert venues, and we don't see a problem. And the reality is that, the way grown-ups use cannabis and wine is not such a public safety hazard.
In fact, when I've hosted, and when it was still medical and we were still sort of allowed to do these things, I actually found that people regulated themselves even more when the two products were being offered together, rather than them getting, super drunk and or super high. They actually had, kind of reached that elevated state and then very much self-regulate in a way that they don't when it's just one or the other. So I've actually found it to be beneficial from a tasting experience. And, maybe you can speak to this a little bit as well, Devin, that people actually are in more of a receptive place to not only hear about the nuances of your brand and your wines, but also are self-regulating from that standpoint, not there to, get messed up.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think we often see, through the tours that we've had and the experience, it's a focused clientele and one that is self-regulating. I've never had an issue at all as far as somebody that's been, overserved throughout the day with cannabis. And so, we come in as a second, third stop on a winery tour. Oftentimes, that's not the case, right? We have to really focus in and the responsible hospitality in those courses that we take. And so, I bartended for a long time in my life too, and I can honestly say it was the same experience. Now, it may be anecdotal, but bartending in Sonoma County, there's a lot of people that are crossfading, and they're not in a state of complete inebriation. It's something that I do think there's a self-regulating quality to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jared, I always speak with people about the idea that with cannabis, we have this magical thing called CBD, which is actually the antidote to the high of THC. So unlike wine, if I get somebody too drunk in my tasting room, I can't give them some magical tincture that makes them not drunk anymore. Coffee doesn't work. But CBD is very effective, not only at helping to mitigate the toxic effects of alcohol on the liver, which is another whole conversation, but actually can bring people down from being too high. So on your tours, do you do a little bit of that education at the beginning of the day, or are you leaving that up to the dispensaries to have that discussion?
Yeah, we leave it up to the dispensaries. We educate throughout the day on a lot of the similarities and some of the agricultural practices, but the point is for them to meet with these people at the dispensaries that are living, breathing, working this industry every single day, and they can get that information right from the source. That way there's no misinformation there.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, when you are working with cannabis brands, what are you finding the most effective way, because we're talking about wine sort of still being the socially acceptable way to get together and party, how can we reverse that? How do you see us getting creative about actually having cannabis as the mainstay of an event and then educating on the wine?
And educating on the wine? Yeah, so I think I work with a lot of cannabis brands throughout all of my events, and I think what works really well is education, of course. And so I know that there's many hurdles and challenges that are going on right now, but I think that the future right now is figuring out how we can work together and how we can bring the industry closer. So I'm actually a part of a group called Crop to Kitchen, which is an organization based in San Francisco where we're working towards legalizing cannabis cuisine and cannabis restaurants throughout California. But we're also trying to figure out ways that we can bring the wine and cannabis industry closer together and figure out, okay, well, can we have more cannabis-friendly event venues? Like, can we eventually have ABC licensed venues work with us? We potentially could have wine and weed together. So I think like Crop to Kitchen is something that I'm very passionate about, and I know both the cannabis and wine industry are passionate about that as well.
Indeed. I've got a question here that was well-timed. Wine plus weed can be served at private ticketed events where attendees pay, ? Omar?
I don't think there's any definitive guidance on that question because, but I think if it's, I guess that's the answer. It depends.
Is that legal advice? And can you have a cannabis-only event space? That is a yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And also, something that, talking about leveraging brand equity, like winery owners can use their brand and they can produce cannabis products. They just can't be sold or consumed on the same premises. Mm-hmm. And so somebody who has like a well-known brand and they want to expand into the cannabis space, there's complete ways they can do it. Basically, they would enter into an intellectual property licensing agreement with a licensed cannabis manufacturer, and then they would register as a regulatory owner with the Bureau of Cannabis Control, and there's no prohibition on ABC licensees being owners of cannabis companies. They just can't sell the cannabis and alcohol on the same premises.
And I think that that's been a misnomer, because I actually think that was written into the regs at one point, that just like you can't own a winery or a liquor license and a firearms company, we were under the impression for a while that you can't actually own a winery and a cannabis company, but it sounds like that's changed.
Yes, the regs contain no prohibition.
Can you You can have the, sorry, just to clarify, you can have the brand and license the brand to a cannabis licensee, but can you as a winery owner also have cannabis licenses?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Do you guys hear that? That's really exciting.
And so there's no impediment into established alcohol licensees entering the cannabis industry.
As we're talking about the idea of private versus public events and selling tickets, and there's a lot of questions around, can we sell tickets to cannabis events? And that's kind of a whole rabbit hole of its own. But someone here asked, what designates the term private versus a public event?
I think private event is not open to the public, and you know, that again, this gets like really into legal semantics. But I think if an event is, you know, not advertised to the public, or if it's advertised as a private invitation-only event, then that would make it a private event.
Awesome. And Jamie, I know you have a couple of points of experience with this. So yeah, please.
Yeah, so something with private events that you have to remember is it's a private event with a private residence, which also means that you have a closed guest list and you're not selling tickets to the public. So those are the 4 things that I always keep in mind with public or private events. Because as soon as you open up to public, then you are going to face these many challenges that we're talking about in today's panel. So when I work with winery partners, I really try to focus on those 4 points to protect them and also to protect the cannabis brands that I'm working with.
And you can also use that invitation-only, you know, private aspect as a way to highlight the exclusivity of the event, that not everybody can attend the event. It makes it even more premier.
Exactly.
Awesome. Jared, do you let people get high during your tour?
Unfortunately, right now, no. But we do a lot of education around it. That way, if they want to incorporate it in their everyday life, they can do that. If they have questions and get comfortable with the products. So that's. But
if they buy products at one of the dispensaries you visit, they could stop somewhere in a private location and perhaps imbibe on their tax-paid personal property.
I think that might be a good question for Omar.
Well, you know, if they were to stop at a dispensary that had on-site consumption, there'd be no impediment against them consuming on-site. But Soulful right now does not have on-site consumption.
So a lot of those are in San Francisco right now, or the East Bay, where they have on-site consumption. There's lounges that you can consume, but none here in Sonoma County.
Absolutely. When you're, as a winery perspective, are you marketing yourself as cannabis friendly at this point?
No.
That wasn't the right answer.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, honestly, even coming here, right? I had to go through the channels, and luckily, you know, I have been with a company that really trusts what I'm doing. But that's part of what I think we're all here for, right? Is removing, you know, some of that stigma, because there's a whole list of things and reactions that I get when I talk to people about working, say, with Jared, or even coming to speak on this panel. I would say the number one is you know, wineries and the wine industry often still kind of associating marijuana with just giggles and munchies, and I think it's just so misguided. It's not, and maybe it's out of fear. Maybe it's a knee-jerk thing that they're worried about the market share. But yeah, we don't. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't or won't. I think part of that, though, has to do with the regulations and some of those things lifting to where we can integrate an experience in you know, a more comprehensive way.
Mm-hmm. Marketing your winery at cannabis events, for example, is sort of the back way to do that. Yeah, absolutely. We had a couple of questions about selling tickets, and specifically there's a lot of questions about you're not allowed to sell tickets to a cannabis event if people are going to be consuming. Can you explain all of that detail?
I've had clients who had issues where they were selling tickets to a cannabis event, and it was advertised as a consumption event, thinking like now it's been 2 years since Prop 64, you know, took effect, and there shouldn't be an impediment. And the Bureau of Cannabis Control was saying, if there's going to be any cannabis consumption, you need to get a cannabis event organizer license, and you also get need to get a temporary cannabis event license for that particular event. And so there's a way to have consumption events under California law that are cannabis consumption only. Could you have consumption event where there's no wine being consumed like a cannabis consumption event where wine is not being consumed but just appreciated. We haven't seen any guidance from the Bureau of Cannabis Control prohibiting that, you know. So
who's going to try it with me first?
A sensory experience, appreciating the wine and the odors, and you know, checking out the legs, but maybe not actually consuming. I think that is possible. Whereas the ABC guidance, which might be an underground regulation, is saying, you know, you can't have at an ABC licensed premises cannabis that is provided for a sensory experience, just so people can check it out and smell it. You can't do that if it's for a business purpose, which I think is, you know, over-regulation. It's the nanny state, and they're basically coming up with a regulation that didn't go through the regular regulatory process. You know, it has to be announced, and it was announced in a handout, basically.
Right. Yes, very formal. So I know a lot of people were surprised when I had my cannabis delivery service running throughout California that our demographic skewed much older and much more female than a lot of people thought. And it really was this parents and professionals demographic that was coming to us as a curated cannabis company for guidance, for informed information, for curated selections of products with, you know, sort of trusted quality standards and all those things that, you know, certainly were non-existent in some ways 4 years ago and are, I think, even difficult to find now. But you and I spoke a little bit about, and I'd love for the two of you to answer this, and maybe even Jamie, are we seeing a demographic swing with folks that are more interested in these various cross-pollinated experiences? Is this the parents and professionals? Is it the baby boomers that are buying $300 bottles of Cabernet? Like, who are these people?
I mean, through the small sample size that we have publicly, I would say that the boomers aren't. Even though I've seen this market share growing in cannabis for boomers, I don't know if that stigma is still attached to it, to where they're not as willing to be out in the public. So oftentimes, I would say, you know, Jared's tours and who we're seeing is skewing younger, and ultimately, I do think that there's a real, I mean, marketing essence to that too, because I think when we first touched base, I often call the millennial generation the discovery generation, right? I am a millennial, but it's about that I want something new. We see that even in our SKUs, in the varietals that we sell. We see younger demographics often engaging with Sangiovese over Cabernet Sauvignon, asking about something other than Chardonnay at times. You know, I've been to some of the new hip restaurants where you've got 2-3 Albariños and no Chardonnay, right? And you're saying, well, that has to be backed by something. So I think one of the things that is really interesting about partnerships with say, somebody like Jared and Sonoma County Experience and cannabis in general is the fact that we're doing something new and attractive. And you know, that's what's getting the first touch point.
Absolutely. So overall, it sounds like we're you know, in the process of combining these products really as increasing the sphere of influence component, as well as in a cross-pollination from a brand experience component. But as far as, you know, actually combining these two products on a given premise, that is what is not allowed. So these are really amazing, I think, questions about, Jared, if you've, and I think, can you guys hear me? The guests and clients, you know, when they're coming to you, what is it that they're expecting, and how are we able to live up to those expectations in both industries?
So we pride ourselves and we hang our hat on taking our guests right to the source. That way they're getting the information direct, whether it's the cannabis side or the wine side. So whether they're going to Hook and Ladder and they're meeting with Devin and they're getting asked the questions on their growing techniques that they use out in the vineyards, or it's a place like Cannacraft where it's literally the Willy Wonka of the cannabis industry. When you go in there, walking this facility and being able to see that side of it. But every place that we stop at is making sure we're going right to the source, and they're getting to ask those questions from those people.
And Jamie, you can maybe speak to that as well. What's the future of these events look like if we had everything we could wish for?
Yeah, well, something that I've always believed in is what grows together goes together. So California, we're not just known for great wines anymore. Like, we have world-class cannabis, and there's so many people that want to come to California to explore this firsthand. So I really think that like tours like Jared's doing. I went on his tour yesterday. It was amazing, and it really just kind of opened my eyes of what the future could look like for wine and weed. But we're also seeing like the rise of cannabis vacations. Like people are looking for cannabis-friendly destinations, cannabis bed and breakfast, cannabis-friendly hotels, and cannabis-infused dinners. And all of these things just so happen to be located in wine country as well. So I think that, everyone in this room knows that tourism is something that the wine industry has done incredibly well here in California. And I think that the cannabis industry can learn a lot and follow maybe in the same footsteps. But I think that we really need to work together to advocate for laws and regulations that allow wine and weed to partner and to grow together.
And one of the first questions that we got today on the app from the audience, I think, is one that we probably all hear a lot, which is, as Canna tourism increases in this area over time, do you think that that will come at the expense of tasting room traffic for wineries? Who wants to take that one?
I can take that, because for us, when we approached the business model, it was that these industries, they can work together, they're allies. When you're here, in Sonoma County, for example, you have both of these industries that produce a very high quality, and you can experience both of them within one day.
It's amazing.
It's a shared experience. So
absolutely. And I think what you're forgetting is, in most states outside of California, people cultivating cannabis either can't because of their growing season or can't because of their local regulations actually grow cannabis outside in the soil under the sun, in my belief, the way it was intended. And so we actually do grow the best cannabis in the world here in Northern California. I don't think anybody would argue with that. And so this idea that we now can open up and shed the light on yet another magnificent tourism option here in Northern California, I mean, these are opportunities that forward-thinking wineries are going to be able to grab onto and expand exponentially if they want to.
To touch on the visitation piece, I tend to look at it in a different way, because I think that the short answer could be yes, maybe we do see less traffic because there's more to do in an area. But you've seen so many wineries come online in the last 20, 25 years. Many of them are not in our area, out of state. The competition is oftentimes really more aggressive through wine. And so for us to have an area that's still exciting for visitation, and to make sure that we're actually seeing more people, that's where the partnership lies. So you may see some competition in that sense, but it also it keeps us relevant.
Absolutely.
It keeps Sonoma County relevant.
100%. I would agree. Omar, there's a question that I think parlays into this if you have another thing to add, but people are interested.
Before we move on, I would
please.
say there's really no on-site consumption that we have in Sonoma County or in Napa County, in wine country in California. And so when people buy their cannabis and they ingest their cannabis, they usually want something to do. And what are they going to do? They're going to go to the tasting room.
Truly. Thank you for that. And they do allow on-site consumption in Santa Rosa, because we're building an immersive retail destination in Santa Rosa that's coming
I have
in
a client who has
years.
an on-site consumption of edibles only, permitted, but I don't think they're allowing
They're not allowing smoking or vaping, but there's so many options to play.
That's true.
Outside of those.
That's true, but I think people are probably going to buy their cannabis, ingest it the way they traditionally have, which is smoking or vaporizing in their Airbnb or their hotel room, and then venturing forth into the world with wide-eyed wonder.
You just terrified every hotelier. Exactly. So another question related to that. Everybody wants to see the plants. And right now, California regulation doesn't allow us to take visitors to cannabis farms. Do you see that changing? Are there ways around that? How can people see? It's impossible to walk into a cannabis garden and not feel happy, for any of you who have not had the joy of doing that. So how do we expand that opportunity for people?
I guess, you can't really take visitors onto the premises of a licensed cultivation facility, but you can go see somebody's personal grow, and you can grow 6 plants statewide indoors, and in many jurisdictions like Sonoma County, you can have 6 plants outdoor for personal use. So I guess part of the tour could be check out somebody's personal grow and see the plants in their full glory.
I love that. That's a great idea. When we talk about all the reasons people come to wine country, being able to see the wine grapes is a really big deal. So perhaps your personal grow on your winery premise of a few cannabis plants would be a nice attraction. I think, we're all learning right now within a lot of gray area, a lot of area that hasn't been sort of sussed out in the regulatory compliance. And, there's a couple of questions from the audience like, if I sort of push the boundaries, do you think that I'm going to be made an example of? And I hear that a lot. And you can answer this as well, but having spoken with a lot of the regulators at the state and city and county levels, they're not here to bust us, right? They're here to actually figure out how this is going to work within the context of the existing regulations. I have not heard anybody with any intention of getting wineries or cannabis companies in trouble or taking away their licenses if they mess up once.
I think the Bureau of Cannabis Control and the cannabis regulatory agencies are still in an instructional stage where they're trying to educate their licensees, and so they're not taking a punitive approach. The Department of Alcohol Beverage Control, however, I don't think is in an educational stage right now, and they take enforcement far more seriously.
So for all you ABC license holders, something to understand and know about. I can say, I would like for all of us to go around and say, like, what would your perfect cannabis and wine day look like if you could bring a group of people around, whether it's, today or hopefully we can work on legislation to make it possible. But I was just going to say for some wineries that I work with, they've, wanted me to put together tours of cannabis companies as a benefit for their wine club members. So, just like this extra little kind of back room, secret for their top wine club members. Can you get us into the Emerald Cup? Can we go to the Wine and Weed Symposium with you? So, people are really asking, and it's becoming this cool thing that it's still an evocative topic, and there's so much creativity that we can all think about in the way of how to incorporate these things for more positivity and light and happiness and joy. So Jamie, what's your perfect cannabis day look like?
So as you know, I believe that cannabis belongs at the dinner table alongside your favorite wines and cuisine. So my favorite, or I guess my ideal day would be an amazing infused dinner cooked by a cannabis chef and then paired with excellent wines from Sonoma County, since we're here. And then just to enjoy cannabis with your close family and friends in a beautiful setting without having to worry about all these crazy laws and regulations that we're dealing with. So I think that would be my ideal day.
For me, I recently attended a cannabis retreat in the Santa Cruz Mountains. That was a yoga retreat, and you basically did yoga in the morning with a live DJ, and then afterwards you ate like super good organic food, and then afterwards they had workshops, and then there was a second yoga session right before dinner, and then at dinner, what was missing was the wine. And so if there had been like wine, I would have just felt
your
complete.
Perfect day.
Yeah.
Yay, that sounds pretty good to me. Jared?
Mine would be visiting a farm. So getting people to visit a living, breathing, working farm where they can meet with somebody and learn about the growing techniques and really immerse themselves in that, because I think it's a truly unique experience being at a working farm.
It absolutely is. And everyone in this room has the responsibility to help shape regulations right now. I've said this before, but being in this since 2015 in this cannabis space and getting into this new regulatory, legal, quote unquote, environment, it's unbelievable how much you can actually, as an individual right now, shape the future of what both of these industries look like in the context of bringing cannabis into a regulated state. Take that. It's your power right now. If you want to see something change, you want to be able to go visit a cannabis farm, right into your local legislator, right into your local city council folks, wherever you are. You can actually make a difference right now. They're listening. Jared, what's your perfect day?
I'll go with Omar's day minus the yoga plus the wine. All right,
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that concludes Leveraging Your Brand with Cannabis and Wine.